Thanks, brother. Yama, everybody. Yeah, really humbling beginning. I love to be at events where we're actually here with Mob, have the young ones come out and dance for us, and an opportunity to talk. So, Indigenous voices on social media has been getting more and more attention over the last few years, but I think this is the first time I've actually been at a space where we're not just and here's this little space with just one of us sitting in the space. So actually, this is the first time I've been able to meet Celeste, who a lot of you would know. Lisa, I've only met 2 or 3 times before, Bronwyn the same. And we get to keep up with each other on Facebook and Twitter, but to actually be in places where we can come together, hear each other, and then hang out at the pub later is really awesome opportunity. And so thanks to Bronwyn, to Fire, to all the organisers and everyone who's been a part of it. I'd like to give a special thanks to the dancers and the welcome this morning. That was really beautiful and reminded me of those younger days when I was doing the dances and getting taken around to all the school groups and all the big events, and still dance, but I just keep it to corroboree now, so where there's no cameras and not as much shame, and lots of dark and a little bit of fire just to see, so you get the silhouette. I look so much better when I'm dancing in the silhouette. And so, Daniel explained a little bit, and hopefully people have some knowledge of what Indigenous X is, and hopefully you're all there following, except for people who've been sort of banned from the space, which is unfortunate. And even myself, as was mentioned, I used to be a primary school teacher. So that was really all I ever intended to be. And I, like a lot of young, naive fellas, like all the stuff I learned at uni, which was really awesome, no one said, don't actually try to hold your workplace accountable to their anti-racism policies or their anti-racism or Aboriginal education policies when you're young in your career. And I picked a lot of fights along those lines when I saw a lot of stuff that I felt was grossly inappropriate with the way that our students were being treated, and I was the only Aboriginal staff member at school. And I still remember the very first experience I had walking into the school was another teacher came up and he said, "Oh, you're Luke, you're the Aboriginal teacher." I'm like, "Yeah, g'day mate, how you doing?" And he's like, "So do you need a degree to be an Aboriginal teacher?" And I was like, I'm teaching year 3. Like it's not like I'm just teaching Aboriginal studies where maybe there could be an argument for that. It's like, yes, I have a degree. I'm actually the only teacher here who has a degree because everyone else went to teachers college. I had a double degree in Aboriginal studies. But that was my welcome to teaching. And I stayed around for 3 years because I felt it was important not to leave. You can sort of, if you have a job like that, you can leave in 3 years and pretend you moved up instead of got pushed out. Any sooner than that, it feels like, I couldn't hack it and I had to leave, and I did. And I was still actually on leave when I started Twitter, and I had some emails from the Department of Education going, "Yeah, you're actually breaching. You can't say that stuff about us." I was like, "Well, I'm not coming back," and so I'm going to keep saying it. And so that was the moment I was like, shit, I hope social media picks up and that this becomes a thing, because I've kind of burnt every other bridge. And so when I started on social media, it was well before you would see journalists have their @ names. It was well before you saw that connection between this is actually becoming a thing. I just thought it was an amazing opportunity. It was a space where I was able to meet so many different people and feel that I was connecting in a way where I was getting recognised for what I believed in and the knowledge I'd accumulated in a way that I could have some control over. So it wasn't, people still want a piece of you in certain ways or ask things that are grossly inappropriate, and you have to, sort of for a little while there, because I was there in the very early days, I was sort of like the Aboriginal Google of Twitter. And it's like, so what's the Aboriginal word for this? And what's the this for that? And the sort of questions where you got to explain what's wrong with the question, not actually answer it. I got that was me for a very long time. But then more and more people started to come online, and those connections started to grow between us. And because I'd been there a little bit before, and I was a bit cheeky and put way more time on Twitter than I would recommend any human ever do. I built a pretty solid following, and that my personal account is what grew into Indigenous X. And so it was, one, a lot of what I talk about is the need for more diversity of Indigenous voices online. There's not many spaces for that in the mainstream media. There's a few people, Daniel, Rihanna, there's a few mob out there working as journalists, but in terms of individuals, when they get into the media, there's a massive process of censorship and editorialising for a lot of us when we get in there. And if anyone's ever been, grossly misquoted or misrepresented in media, then you know the sort of thing that I'm talking about. And I had quite a number of times. I think the interest with a lot of what I was doing when I was starting Indigenous X, you could see the journalists having this, it's sort of like, oh, the ancient primitive culture meets the internet sort of angle they were trying. And I was like, that's not what, no, like that's not what I'm doing here. And so, when we talk about, we stand on the back of 40,000 years of culture, 60,000, 100,000 years, it doesn't translate that way when they're writing these articles about it. And so Indigenous X was born out of the desire, and one of the sort of catch cries we have for it is, none of us have all the answers, but we all have stories to tell and experiences to share. And that's what Indigenous X is. Everyone who hosts that account, it's not that they are, the wise old person sitting on the mountaintop handing down nuggets and gems of wisdom. It's just, people telling their story. Some of those people hold amazing cultural knowledge. Some of those people are amazing activists, actors, rappers, whoever, whatever. It's not my role to say these are the sort of people I'm looking for on Indigenous X. It's just, if you're Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and you want to host, you get to host. And a lot of what we did at the start, which I think separated us from a lot of the other comparable accounts, was we actually spent a lot of time talking to our audience about what they should expect, rather than trying to cater to our audience and go, oh, this is what they want, let's see how we can give them to that. And it's like, how can we actually shape their understanding to say, no, you're going to get something different each week, and take that for what it is. So don't come with the generic tokenistic questions about stuff. Don't ask stuff you can Google. Wait and see what that individual is, and then ask them questions about that if you want. So, when you've got an Aboriginal lawyer, ask them stuff about that. When you've got an Aboriginal journo, ask them stuff about that. Don't just come with the, oh, but I've never met an Aboriginal person and I want to, because, we're up to like 23,000 followers now, and you just can't keep up with the barrage of, ignorance, for lack of a better term, even the well-meaning stuff. It's like, and it's not the responsibility of every Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person to give up their time all day, every day, to teach people things that they should already know. And so that, the first 18 months was pretty hairy in reshaping that and getting a core group of followers who really understood that and would effectively help sort of police the account. So when people would come with, just horrible trolling or with those inappropriate sort of questions, people would sort of steer them away from the account, have that conversation on the periphery, and let the host and do whatever they wanted to do. So I'll quickly give you a look at some of the things. Oh, what do we do? Just so I can do the cheap plugs and try and get some more hits on my website, because I'm trying to monetize this stuff. So we have a website now. When mentioned that we do crowdfunding now, and it's sort of pretty much everything that I've done has come about just because it's come about. I didn't really set out to do anything that it's done. I just sort of enjoyed the space and have ridden the wave for the last few years, and this is the stuff that's grown out of it. So, for example, with the crowdfunding, the first Christmas that we had, I didn't want to ask anyone to give up Christmas and New Year's to host the account, so I hosted it myself. And back then, this was that One Direction boy band. They used to have these hashtags of all their mad followers going, One Direction to 1 million, and so I had a joke version of that, of Indigenous X to 10,000, and we're at 4,000 followers, and so it was like, let's get it out there, Indigenous X to 10,000. And when I was hosting that week at the start, I said, if we get 10,000 followers this week, it taken me like 2 years to build up the 4,000, then I'll donate 1 cent for every one of them 10,000, which is $100, to the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. And hip hop artist, white fellow named Earthboy, awesome dude, he got in, he's like, but if you get that 10,000, I'll triple your 100. Someone else, I'll kick in 50, I'll kick in 20, I'll kick in 1,000. We got to 10,000 followers that week. We raised just over $10,000 for the ILF. And so because of that, Start Some Good, which one are they up here? Here we go. They reached out and said, oh, but if you can do it, on accident, how about you actually try and do it and see how you go? And so, we put the word out, and we've had a number of different projects come to us now. I think we're up to about 14. 13 successful, which is not a bad success rate from crowdfunding. The average sort of success rate for any crowdfunding project is about 55% if you're a good one. So we're just over 90%, which is pretty solid. And a lot of that has to do with the goodwill in our follower base and that connection and support that comes from that. So, you know, the Guardian stuff we were talking about, you know, the need for more Indigenous voices in the media, you know, and that's Indigenous X was born out of that. The Guardian, when they were coming in from the UK, they were copping a bit of flack from a lot of Australian media at the time, going, "Oh, these fellas don't know Australia." Right? And I, you know, when I met with them, it's like, when it comes to reporting on Indigenous stuff, it's actually better if you know nothing, because the people who think they know something do it so wrong. If you're a blank slate, I can actually start with you a lot easier and grow from there. And so now they showcase every host each week, and they get to write their own op-ed in The Guardian, which again, a rare opportunity for most of us to get that sort of platform, to get your voice out in that sort of way. But again, none of this was set out to achieve. It was just we were in that right space at the right time as this stuff kicked off, that we got these opportunities. And so we've moved most recently into publishing our own articles. Where are we here? So the Blog X page on Indigenous X, and this actually came about because we did a survey. This was the first time Indigenous X, rather than, we got a lot of media at the start for the project that we were, but not for anything that we were actually doing. And so there was a survey that was put out by the Campaign for Constitutional Recognition that said 87% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would vote yes in a referendum. And with a bit of a background in research and survey stuff, I thought that was a really high number. So we did a survey and we put it up online, and this became the place to host it. And so we found very different numbers, obviously. And so since then, we've just been sort of getting a feel for what the voice is online and how the philosophy of Indigenous X translates in a space where anyone can say anything for a full week, to finding some of those voices who tie into the philosophy of Indigenous X, still giving them the independence to write what they want, but probably more selective because we're only publishing a smaller number of articles. We don't have huge amounts of resource. With the crowdfunding, we did raise some money for Indigenous X, which is paid for Indigenous IT dudes to build our website. So everyone at every level of Indigenous X is Indigenous. All our hosts, lawyer, accountant, IT dudes, everyone that we use on every level are Indigenous people, because the philosophy of, you know, we can do this on our own, we don't need it. You can't then go and, you know, not use the skill set that we have. And working in education so long, there's such a focus on Indigenous leadership, youth leadership, sorry, more so than actual, you know, mid-level career mob, and there's so many people out there who are well established, who've been working in spaces for 20 years, but you know, when you're in those education spaces, the feel is really that, you know, you've got to give up on the adults and focus on the children. That philosophy, I think, underpins so much of what happens in Indigenous youth leadership spaces. And so, yeah, we've got an Indigenous Youth Parliament, which is really awesome, but we don't have an Indigenous Parliament to graduate to when you're too old to be in the Indigenous Youth Parliament anymore. So it's this problematic space, and I was one of those young Indigenous leaders who, you know, they take you around, you shake a minister's hand, you get a photo done, whatever you get to do. You know, some of it was pretty cool, some of it was pretty average. But then you turn 25 and you're not a leader and you're not a young leader anymore, and then you're just like, see ya, and then it's the next generation of young leaders that come through. And so we, you know, part of the conversations we're trying to have is like, actually, we've had a lot of really capable individuals having long-term careers for a very, very long time. We don't need to just focus. Obviously, we need a lot of stuff for our young fellas. So it's not to say don't have anything for the young fellas, but like I said, if it's just this machine that spits them out for the feel-good photo ops, I think we're missing so much opportunity, and there's nothing to catch you at 25 to carry on to actually become whatever you would, you know, relate to as a leader. So I mean, things like Indigenous leader, just as a term, it's a term that our media have completely destroyed for us. So we can't call ourselves Indigenous leader, don't want to be an Indigenous leader, don't want to relate to it, because they're the people that the media pick up. So you'll get someone like Mick Gooder, you know, who's a social justice commissioner, and in a media story about him, it'll say Indigenous leader Mick Gooder and not mention his job title. And it's like, he's got a job title. You don't see white leader. You don't see, you don't even see Australian leader. You don't see that. You don't see that for anyone else. And so, and it's not that these people have labelled themselves Indigenous leader and stand up going, I am the king of all blackfellas in the country, but it's how it gets framed in the media, and it's part of that homogenising of indigeneity in this sense. And I mean, we see it, and again, with the Recognise campaign, what has been the most interesting conversation for me outside of the actual campaign itself is everyone saying, we want you all to come together to speak with one voice because I will do whatever you want to do. And you can't do that because different people have different voices and different views. And so every non-Indigenous Australian on this issue, I think more than a lot of others that have come up before, it's like, no, actually, you've got a responsibility to go and read all sides of the story and have your own view. And there's some nuanced conversation that needs to be had here. And so you can't just go, oh, can you just tell me what the Indigenous leader said and I'm going to do that. And so, we're starting to get to a point where we can break down that. And I find so much of when I say, Indigenous X is about breaking down the homogenising of the view of indigeneity, I really think that is like just hugely unambitious for where we actually should be in 2015. Like, we're people too. We're not all the same. Like, really? You know what I mean? We've been here since forever. We've been around whitefellas for the last few hundred years. We've got those interactions, and yet we're still playing at this painfully unambitious level. And when I look to what most of it comes down to, more than anything else, I think it's media representation. Because apart from our own personal experiences, the media is what shows us what's happening in the rest of the world. Before social media came along and we could build that connection, but social media still got media in it, it's still a form of media. The difference is you can build your own platform on your own terms. You don't have to fall into those traditional spaces. So like I'm an adjunct associate professional to UC. Sorry, I forget the term, but it's like, it's awesome. And I get to tap into the journalism space and work with these young fellas, but I'm a teacher, not a journalist. So it's sort of like I can go and talk about, and if I understand it, I can teach it because that's the nature of teaching. But I'm now an independent Indigenous media operator, practitioner, like all these really cool buzzwords I really like, but they're not words that I actually relate to in any meaningful way. And it's about, even the same with activists, we were talking about this, it's sort of like, I don't really consider a lot of what I'm doing to be activism. I consider it just to be common sense for me, from my experiences for where I'm at. And so, I've been involved in marching down the streets and carrying the signs or creating the hashtags and doing it, So instead of taking to the streets, we take to the tweets and all these, there's all these really cool sort of, phrases and buzzwords that come out of it. But at the end of the day, we're just pushing for the same basic level stuff. And the conversations that I had on Indigenous media, so many of the folks like, you're blowing my mind, I've never even thought about this. It's like, I doubt there's much that's been tweeted on Indigenous X that mob haven't been talking about amongst ourselves for a very long time, long before social media came about. The difference is it now has a visibility and an accessibility. And obviously the problem with that, so there's the double-edged sword of all of these things, you can put yourself in that, oh, I'm not one of them because now I know, what do you do to help close the gap? I follow Indigenous X, sort of pat yourself on the back, I've done my bit, I'm going on. And we always worry about when we offer those terms of like, so many people, I think, and Australia more broadly, when we talk about Indigenous justice, when we talk about reconciliation, which isn't a term I'm particularly fond of or interested in, but whenever we're talking about that, what always comes back is white Australia wants to throw racism is over, it's all done, get over the past party. And then it's done. And so, we saw that with the bridge walk, we saw that with the apology, we see that with everyone wants this one thing that'll do. And so, not to say that these things have no value, but there's a ton of hard work and personal change and struggle and individual forms of justice that need to happen, and shift in attitudes across the board that need to happen before we could be anywhere that resembles anything that looks like equality or justice. But we just always want to reduce it down to this one moment and then go, it's done now, stop whinging at us please, we're good people, it was all in the past, move on. And that's, when we talk about that, it's like, I'm not whinging about what happened 200 years ago, I wasn't there. I'm whinging about what happened yesterday, what's happening today, and what more likely than not is going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. And for the first time now, I'm going to be a father soon, and it's got me thinking, yay, going to become a daddy blogger. But it's really shifted my thinking. When we talk about those future generations, it's always been at a very abstract level for me, and it's sort of, I think like so many, like men in my family don't make it past 50. My dad didn't made it to 48. His dad younger than that, and so it's sort of just, I'm just going to go hard doing what I do, and I don't mind if I have to starve. I don't have any superannuation because I didn't expect to get to that point of life, and so now in the last year, I'm sort of like, shit, actually, I wouldn't mind getting old. I wouldn't mind, watching this happen, and I wouldn't mind leaving the world a little bit better than when I found it for this mob. And what does that look like, and what role can Indigenous X play in that? And we were talking last night, and I think so much of the problem of the homogenising of Indigenous voices comes down to we try to pick up everything all at once, and it's too freaking heavy. And you feel like you've got to do more and more every time. And so, there's all these really cool little milestones of things that Indigenous X has done. And it's very rare that I actually stop and appreciate them. And so I wanted to take a minute now and just pick out a few of the little things, but something we did before Indigenous X came up. And I'm actually going to show you, if I can bring up Google. So, it used to be on Google when you got in and you typed in, does anyone know what it used to be as the top suggested search? Jokes. Aboriginal jokes. Was there for a very long time. And I didn't know algorithms and stuff when I started, so I didn't realise that had nothing to do with Google. That's on us as a country. That's most people who type in Aboriginal were looking for Aboriginal jokes beyond anything else. And so, every kid in school, and that's a lot of kids every day, who were getting on there looking for something, find along the jokes. We got Google to remove jokes from the algorithm. So if you want to find Aboriginal jokes, you still can, because freedom of speech and all that sort of stuff. So, but you've actually got to go to the next word before it'll come up. So when you just type in Aboriginal on its own, so if you're looking for it, you'll find it. But if you just, as a high school kid told to go look about the freedom rides, go to look about your local community, you're not directed there. And things like that, I think, have a certain significance. Like I said, for me, when I'm doing this stuff, you just do it, and then you do the next thing, and then you do the next thing, and then you do the next thing. So you don't throw parties over this sort of shit. You don't win awards for this sort of thing. And you just do it, and everyone goes, yeah, that was pretty cool, and then you do the next one. But when you think about Google, if you had a problem with Google, it's like, what would you do about that? You're not going to go march down the street at the front of Google. You're not going to call Google up on the phone. You're not going to think that a monolith of that size is ever going to be there. But Google Australia and New Zealand have a Twitter account. So we didn't even lobby them, we didn't protest them, we just let them know. And they fixed it up. After a while, we let them know again and again and again until they heard it. But it wasn't a big campaign, it had no hashtag for it. It was just like, this is really shit, this needs to change. It changed. When recently we had a senator, who was it, the Betts, who was talking about the Negro Chief Justice, and this really weird conversation popped up in media around, is Negro a racist word? And people saying, no, of course it's not. And yes, of course it is. And Betts came out and he's like, well, Martin Luther King used it 16 times in his I Have a Dream, 50-something years ago. So it's sort of not the same sort of context to compare yourself to that conversation. But the Drum, they wrote an article about it, and they got the editor of the Macquarie Dictionary to talk about taboo words. And in that article, this is a quote from it, if you are a Boong, you can call other Aborigines a Boong, and that's okay in Aboriginal English. And no. Nope. So I wrote an article about it on the Indigenous X site, and not expecting anything would change. Thought maybe the Drum would remove it and edit it, because I slammed them pretty hard in it for their editorial. But the Macquarie Dictionary actually replied and changed the definition. So it's like, we've got Google to change their search algorithms. We've got a dictionary to change its definition based on the force of the argument we made in the context. And so, again, these aren't things that necessarily put food on the table or change the world, but they're things that show that you can change the things you didn't think you could change. And that, more than anything from Indigenous X, what I would like to leave behind when it's done is a sense of, not everyone is going to win every time on this sort of stuff, but those things that normally we just get depressed about and bitch about to each other, we can do it in a way that actually gets an outcome out of them sometimes. And like I said, these were unintentional. I did them before I had any sense of realization that I could have this sort of influence. So I just did it to bitch about it loudly with friends and online and vent for my own sanity to work through the process. And as a teacher, to make a case of, when the editor of the Macquarie Dictionary tells you this is how this word works, you believe that. That's a word god. That's the editor of a dictionary. And so to be able to counter that and put something out there, so even if it doesn't change, at least you can know that that's not the truth. But then it actually has a domino effect, and we're starting to get some outcomes. I said we've raised over $300,000 for 13 different projects. We've got an Indigenous media site that's entirely independent, so there has been Indigenous media spaces before, but we've got no funding apart from what we crowdfunded. And so, that argument previously of there's no market for this stuff, there's no interest for this stuff, Indigenous demographics in terms of marketing, no one's interested in it. And that's long-standingly been the argument for it. And anything that happens that they're not happy with, you don't get it again for a very, very long time. So, people now would see the black comedy TV show on ABC. It's like, but many people know about Basically Black, which was Indigenous stand-up comedy in the very early 70s on ABC that they didn't like, so they pulled it off air 40 years before we got another go. And I'm a big fan of sketch comedy and stand-up comedy, and so when I look at some of the old stuff, out of the Native American, Native Canadian, African American stand-up comedy has this rich history where ours seems to have sort of like started there and then got smacked really, really hard and been very small on the fringe, and now we're getting another run. When we lost ATSIC, we got Congress Mob years later in a very different form. So whenever we have something that fails or is made to fail or shut down with the image created that it failed, we don't get another run very, very quickly. But you don't need a TV station when you've got YouTube, and I'd rather put something on YouTube than on TV because I control the editorial. I'd rather write an article for the Indigenous X blog than for anyone else because I control the editorial. And so to have those spaces is rare, and all I hope, and this is again something we were talking about last night, it's sort of Indigenous X, I feel, was just sort of pulled in by gravity into fill a space that there was a need for, and I just went along with it. But you worry, have I filled up that space to the point where no one else can get sucked into that same gravitational pull? Like, is there only space for one Indigenous X? Is there only space for one of these? And I would really hope not, because I'm trying to show the diversity of mob. There's 500,000 of us. I've had 200 hosts on the account, and there's room for 500,000 of us. So I'd like to think there's space for this to grow and become a catalyst rather than be a plug that fills the gap and go, oh, we don't need to do anything else because we did that. The same with what I was talking about, oh, well, we don't need to do anything for justice because I walked across a bridge in like 2000 and something. The Prime Minister said, sorry, why haven't you said thank you yet? And these are the conversations that are still had very regularly, and the attitudes that are had. And so we're always worried that every step forward is going to be that last step. And then you've got to hold that ground until eventually they force you to take those backward steps. And someone else has got to start again another 40 years later. But I'm hoping through social media and through the connections that we can make here today and more broadly, that this will just be the first step, and that we can come together and take this journey to wherever it goes. Like I said, I don't have the answers, but I've got a few stories to tell. I think that's about me, is it, Brian, or what? What are we doing on time? I've been paying no attention.
Yeah, right on time.
Beautiful.
Can you please thank Luke Pearson?